Science fiction is the genre that asks the question every other form avoids. What if? What if consciousness could be manufactured? What if distance made us irrelevant? What if the future looked back at us and found us wanting? No other genre has produced as many of cinema's defining images: the monolith, the replicant, the starfield, the chrome suit, because no other genre is permitted to imagine the world from scratch. These are our picks for the 20 greatest science fiction films ever made, the ones that built the vocabulary that the genre and the culture still speaks. Number 20, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977. Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters is the first contact film as spiritual experience, a work less interested in the mechanics of alien life than in what it would feel like to encounter something so far beyond human comprehension that the encounter itself becomes a kind of conversion. Richard Dreyfuss plays Roy Neary, an ordinary power company lineman in Indiana, whose brief sighting of unidentified lights in the sky dismantles his marriage, his career, and his sense of reality, leaving him obsessed with a shape he cannot name and a destination he cannot explain. The film is patient in ways Spielberg's subsequent work rarely permitted. The first act trusts silence and confusion rather than momentum. John Williams's five-note motif is the score's most important gesture, a greeting rather than a fanfare, tentative rather than triumphant. The ending, in which humanity's first response to confirmed alien contact is not fear, but music, remains one of the most quietly radical choices in mainstream science fiction cinema. Close Encounters is a film about wonder, not the wonder of technology or discovery, but the deeper wonder of realizing that the universe is populated and that its inhabitants arrived with something to say. Number 19, Ex Machina, 2014. Alex Garland's directorial debut is the artificial intelligence film as chamber drama. Three characters in a glass house in the Norwegian wilderness, one of whom may or may not be conscious, and the slow, methodical exposure of which of the human characters is the most dangerous. Domhnall Gleeson plays Caleb, a programmer brought to his CEO's isolated compound to conduct a Turing test on Ava, played by Alicia Vikander with a physical stillness that communicates interiority more convincingly than any amount of expository dialogue. Oscar Isaac's Nathan is the film's most compelling creation, a man of genuine brilliance and genuine moral vacancy, whose power over Ava tells us everything about the relationship between creator and created. Garland understands that the most unsettling question the film can ask is not whether Ava is conscious, that is resolved early, but what consciousness without freedom becomes over time. The final sequence reframes every preceding scene and leaves the audience with a conclusion the film refuses to articulate. Ex Machina treats its central philosophical question with a seriousness that the genre, when dealing with artificial minds, rarely manages to sustain from first frame to last. Number 18, District 9, 2009. Neil Blomkamp's debut feature uses the science fiction film's oldest device, the alien as metaphor, with a specificity that most genre allegory avoids. The aliens of District 9 are stranded above Johannesburg, confined to a slum administered by a South African government bureaucracy with a long institutional history of managing populations it considers inferior. Charlton Copley plays Wikus van der Merwe, the bureaucrat assigned to relocate the aliens, who undergoes a physical transformation that forces him to experience the situation from the other side. The found footage and documentary registers are handled with a control Blomkamp never quite replicated in his subsequent work. The mechanics serve the allegory rather than overwhelming it. The action sequences in the second half represent a compromise with commercial expectation that slightly weakens the film's integrity. What survives that compromise is a science fiction film that takes the question of what we do to those we classify as less than human with genuine moral weight, arriving in the end at no resolution that lets the audience feel clean about the world it has just watched. Number 17, Moon, 2009. Duncan Jones's Moon is the science fiction film as meditation on identity, stripped to a single location, a single character, and a mystery whose solution reframes the first act in ways the audience can feel approaching before it arrives. Sam Rockwell plays Sam Bell, a lunar helium-3 miner in the final weeks of a 3-year solo contract, assisted only by the base AI system Gertie, voiced by Kevin Spacey, with a warmth the film deploys against audience expectation. The film's debts to 2001 and Solaris are worn openly, and some have criticized it for the weight of those influences. That criticism undervalues what Jones and Rockwell achieve within a very limited budget and a genuinely difficult formal constraint. Rockwell is almost the only human presence on screen, and the isolation accumulates with a precision that lesser actors could not sustain across a feature's length. Moon is a film about what corporations do to workers when those workers are too remote for anyone to advocate on their behalf. A science fiction premise that has become, in the years since its release, somewhat less speculative than it once appeared. Number 16. Arrival, 2016. Denis Villeneuve's Arrival is the first contact film as linguistic philosophy, an argument that the language you speak determines not merely how you think about time, but whether time is something you move through or something you inhabit all at once. Amy Adams plays Dr. Louise Banks, a linguist recruited by the military to communicate with one of 12 alien vessels that have appeared simultaneously around the world, whose immersion in the aliens' written language begins to alter her perception in ways the film reveals gradually and with structural cunning. The military's assumption throughout that the aliens have arrived with hostile intent that must be decoded before they act is the film's sharpest statement about the way institutions interpret everything through the lens of their own aggression. Jeremy Renner's physicist provides a contrasting perspective the film treats with fairness rather than condescension. Johan Johansson's score is among the most distinctive of the decade. Arrival is a science fiction film whose central revelation is not a reversal, but an expansion. The moment at which the audience's understanding of everything they have seen doubles in depth, and the grief the film has been carrying all along becomes visible. Number 15. Planet of the Apes, 1968. Franklin Schaffner's Planet of the Apes is the science fiction film as societal mirror, an inversion of the human hierarchy that uses the spectacle of a world governed by intelligent primates to examine the assumptions underpinning the one governed by intelligent humans. Charlton Heston plays Taylor, an astronaut crash-landed on a distant planet, whose gradual discovery that apes occupy the top of the social order and humans exist as primitive captives drives both the adventure and the allegory. Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter deliver performances of unexpected warmth beneath the prosthetic makeup, and the film's sympathy is as much with the chimpanzee scientists trying to understand Taylor as with Taylor himself. The script, co-written by Rod Serling, has the lean moral efficiency of the best Twilight Zone episodes, each scene advancing both plot and argument without redundancy. The final image, which revealed the film's secret in a single wide shot, is the most imitated twist in science fiction cinema. The imitators have never matched the original because what makes it devastating is not the image itself. It is everything the audience misunderstood in the preceding 90 minutes before finally seeing it. Number 14. Brazil, 1985. Terry Gilliam's Brazil is the dystopian science fiction film as Fever Dream, a portrait of a totalitarian bureaucracy so thorough and so absurd that its victims can survive within it only through fantasy. Jonathan Pryce plays Sam Lowry, a low-level government functionary in an unnamed retro-futurist state who dreams of being a winged warrior rescuing a woman, the same woman, played by Kim Greist, who surfaces in his waking life and draws him into a resistance network that may or may not exist. Robert De Niro appears as a heating engineer who is, in this film's logic, the most dangerous man alive. Michael Palin plays a torturer with the cheerful professionalism of a salesman. Gilliam fought the studio for the version he wanted and prevailed, which is why the film ends as it does, without consolation, without rescue, with the machinery of the state absorbing its victim so completely that he retreats into his own mind and never returns. Brazil is the science fiction film about bureaucracy as a form of violence, and it has aged, across the decades since its release, with a fidelity to the present that Gilliam did not intend as a compliment. Number 13. The Martian, 2015. Ridley Scott's The Martian is the science fiction film as problem-solving exercise, a work whose central pleasure is watching a competent man apply intelligence and humor to a situation that should, by any reasonable calculation, kill him. Matt Damon plays Mark Watney, a botanist stranded alone on Mars after his crew evacuates during a storm and mistakenly assumes he is dead. The film's optimism is its defining quality, and, for some viewers, its limitation. It believes that human ingenuity, institutional cooperation, and orbital mechanics can solve almost anything, and it asks the audience to share that belief for 2.5 hours. Scott brings a tactile authority to the Martian landscape that makes the setting feel discovered rather than constructed. Jessica Chastain, Jeff Daniels, and Chiwetel Ejiofor anchor the Earthside narrative with enough personality to prevent it from becoming procedural. The Martian was criticized in some quarters for its cheerfulness, for treating a survival situation as an adventure rather than a tragedy. That criticism mistakes register for shallowness. The film's argument is that the correct response to impossible circumstances is ingenuity with a sense of humor, and that is not a negligible thing to say. Number 12. Blade Runner, 2049-2017. Denis Villeneuve's sequel to the 1982 original is the rare continuation that deepens rather than dilutes its source, a film that uses the 35 years between the two works as both setting and subject. Ryan Gosling plays K, a replicant Blade Runner who discovers evidence of something that should be impossible in the original film's world, and whose investigation forces both character and audience to reconsider what it means for an artificial being to possess a history. Roger Deakins won an overdue Oscar for the cinematography, which turns the landscapes of 2049, protein farms, irradiated ruins of Las Vegas, the offshore headquarters of the Wallace Corporation, into environments as philosophically loaded as the imagery of the original. Harrison Ford's return is managed with restraint rather than nostalgia, and the film earns his presence rather than trading on it. Blade Runner 2049 was a commercial disappointment and a critical vindication. It is a science fiction film about whether the stories we construct about our own origins are necessary for dignity, and whether that answer changes if the origins turn out to be manufactured. Number 11. Solaris, 1972. Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris is the science fiction film that most thoroughly rejects what the genre usually considers its own preoccupations. There are no space battles, no alien invaders, no technological wonders displayed for their own sake, only a psychologist arriving at a space station, orbiting a mysterious ocean planet, and discovering that the ocean has begun materializing the crew's most suppressed memories in physical form. Natalia Bondarchuk plays the manifestation of the protagonist's dead wife. And the film's central question is not what the ocean is, or what it wants, but what it means to be confronted with a perfect reconstruction of something you lost and destroyed. Tarkovsky shoots in long, contemplative, takes that demand patience and reward it. The film is not interested in narrative momentum, and audiences who approach it with that expectation will find it opaque. Those who move at its pace will find something the science fiction genre rarely offers: a meditation on grief that uses speculative possibility to examine an interior state with more honesty than realist drama can achieve. Solaris is not a film about space. It is a film about what we cannot release, and what happens when we are forced to face it directly. Number 10. The Terminator, 1984. James Cameron's debut is the science fiction film as Relentless Machine, a work whose formal qualities mirror its subject with an efficiency that the technically superior sequel could not replicate. Arnold Schwarzenegger plays a cybernetic assassin sent from 2029 to kill Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, before she can give birth to the man who will lead the human resistance. The film's insight is in the casting. Schwarzenegger's physical presence, which had previously been treated as a liability by serious filmmakers, here becomes the point. The Terminator does not perform It executes, it does not feel, it calculates. Every scene in which Schwarzenegger appears is structured around the audience's dawning understanding that there is nothing behind those eyes that can be reasoned with, bargained with, or frightened. Michael Biehn's Kyle Reese, arriving from the same future with a mission to protect rather than kill, provides the human counterweight, a man so shaped by war that he barely functions in the world of 1984. Cameron shoots Los Angeles as a city already haunted by the future it cannot see. The Terminator is not sophisticated. It is something more durable, absolutely, relentlessly itself. Number 9. Blade Runner 1982. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner arrived to mixed reviews and mediocre box office receipts and spent the subsequent 4 decades becoming the most influential science fiction film ever made. The visual vocabulary it established, the rain-soaked megalopolis, the neon-lit darkness, the fusion of advanced technology and urban decay, has been reproduced so thoroughly in subsequent cinema that audiences now assume these images preceded the film that created them. Harrison Ford plays Deckard, a retired Blade Runner hired to track down a group of rogue replicants whose emotional intensity, as they approach the end of their designed lifespan, exceeds anything the humans around them can manage. Rutger Hauer's Roy Batty is the film's defining presence, a being who has experienced things the film does not show us, and who uses his final minutes to deliver an elegy for a life that will die with him. The final cut, released in 2007, is now the authoritative version, a film about what it means to be human that refuses, with rare integrity, to answer that question cleanly, or to let the audience feel settled after the credits roll. Number 8. Metropolis, 1927. Fritz Lang's Metropolis is the science fiction film at its most architecturally ambitious, a portrait of a future city divided between a gleaming upper world of comfort and an underground world of labor so grinding that the workers operate machines with the mechanical repetition of the machines themselves. Made in Germany in 1927, with a cast of thousands and a production budget that nearly destroyed UFA studios, it established the visual grammar of science fiction cinema before the genre had a name: the towering megacity, the underground proletariat, the robot double, the scientist in his tower. Brigitte Helm plays both Maria, the workers' spiritual leader, and the mechanical doppelganger built in her image, a dual performance that carries more psychological weight than the period's primitive sound design permits. The film's politics are deliberately muddy, a quality that troubled Bertolt Brecht enough to write an essay about it. The proposed resolution that the heart must mediate between the head and the hands is either a utopian gesture or an evasion, depending on your angle of approach. As cinema, it is foundational beyond argument. As a prediction of the cities that followed it, it has proved uncomfortably precise. Number 7. Back to the Future, 1985. Robert Zemeckis' Back to the Future is the science fiction film as comedy, as coming-of-age story, and as structural puzzle, a work that uses time travel not for philosophical weight, but for the pleasure of watching a teenager accidentally threaten his own existence and scramble to repair the damage before the damage becomes fixed. Michael J. Fox's Marty McFly is the quintessential 1980s American teenager, and the film's running joke is that the 1950s his parents lived through were no more innocent than the decade he grew up in. They were simply innocent of different things. Christopher Lloyd's Doc Brown is the archetype of the brilliant eccentric, played with a physical expressiveness that turns exposition into entertainment. The time travel mechanics are handled with a narrative rigor the film makes look effortless. The screenplay's management of cause, effect, and paradox across a single day in 1955 is among the tightest plotting in mainstream Hollywood cinema. Back to the Future has been filed away as light entertainment for so long that its formal achievement is routinely understated. It is, scene for scene, one of the most precisely constructed Hollywood films of the decade, science fiction or otherwise. Number 6. Dune Part 2, 2024. Denis Villeneuve's conclusion to his Frank Herbert adaptation is the science fiction epic as religious critique, a film that takes Herbert's central argument seriously enough to follow it to a place most blockbuster cinema cannot afford to go. Timothée Chalamet's Paul Atreides completes his transformation into a messianic figure across this second chapter, and Villeneuve shoots the progression with a grandeur that makes the ideological content visible. The wider the frame, the more individual agency contracts. Zendaya's Chani is the film's moral anchor, the one character who refuses the mythology being constructed around the man she loves, whose skepticism the film honors rather than dismisses. The sandworm riding sequence is the most spectacular single passage in recent science fiction cinema. Javier Bardem's Stilgar provides the film's darkest comedy, a true believer so committed to prophecy that he reinterprets every contradicting piece of evidence as further confirmation. Villeneuve made the rare blockbuster that trusts its audience to hold two conflicting responses simultaneously, to be thrilled by the spectacle of Paul's ascent and disturbed by what that ascent requires. Dune Part 2 is the science fiction epic pursued with full intellectual seriousness. Number 5. Alien, 1979. Ridley Scott's Alien is the science fiction film as haunted house, a work that borrowed the horror genre's architecture and deployed it in deep space with such conviction that neither genre has been quite the same since. 7 crew members of the commercial space Tug Nostromo intercept a distress signal, land on a barren planetoid, and return with something they did not intend to bring. H.R. Geiger designed the alien life cycle, the facehugger, the chestburster, the adult xenomorph, with a biological coherence that makes the creature feel discovered rather than invented, as though Scott had found documentary footage of something that actually existed somewhere. Sigourney Weaver's Ellen Ripley became, across her first appearance in 3 sequels, the template for the capable female protagonist in science fiction action cinema, a woman whose survival derives from adaptability and intelligence, rather than from any conventional heroic attribute. The film's corporate subplot, the Weyland-Yutani Corporation's willingness to sacrifice the crew in pursuit of the creature's military potential, gives the horror sequences a political underpinning that lifts them above the visceral. What Remains is one of the most perfectly paced science fiction films ever produced, a work that understands the difference between suspense and shock, and at every available opportunity, chooses suspense. Number 4. The Empire Strikes Back, 1980. Irvin Kershner's sequel to Star Wars is the film that transformed a successful entertainment into a mythology, the entry that introduced darkness, consequence, and structural ambiguity that the original had carefully avoided. Luke Skywalker fails, is maimed, and is told something he cannot integrate. Han Solo is defeated and frozen in carbonite with an ease that makes the franchise's universe feel threatening for the first time. Princess Leia declares love at the worst possible moment, and is answered with a line that became one of the most quoted in cinema history. John Williams' score reaches beyond the ceremonial triumph of the first film into something richer. The Imperial March, introduced here, is among the greatest pieces of film music ever written. Kershner, a director of serious dramatic films before George Lucas hired him, brought a human attentiveness to the spaces between action sequences that the original lacked. The scenes on Hoth, the exchanges in the Millennium Falcon, the training sequences on Dagobah, all carry a weight that spectacle alone cannot generate. The Empire Strikes Back achieved its dominance by taking seriously the one thing the original had not quite managed, that the characters deserved as much attention as the universe they inhabited. Number 3. Interstellar, 2014. Christopher Nolan's Interstellar is the science fiction film as act of filial devotion, a work whose scientific ambition and emotional architecture are both organized around the relationship between a father and his daughter, separated by the relativistic physics of deep space travel and the decades those physics consume. Matthew McConaughey plays Cooper, a former NASA pilot recruited to fly humanity's last possible mission through a wormhole near Saturn, knowing that the time dilation of the journey will age his children faster than it ages him. Mackenzie Foy and Jessica Chastain share the role of his daughter Murph, and the film's most powerful passages track her growing understanding of what her father's absence has cost, and what it might still mean. The scientific consultation of physicist Kip Thorne produced the first accurate simulation of a black hole ever rendered cinematically. Gargantua is a piece of scientific art as much as a visual effect. Hans Zimmer's organ-heavy score is the most distinctive of his career. Nolan has been criticized elsewhere for privileging spectacle over emotional coherence. In Interstellar, that argument does not hold. The spectacle is the emotional content. The incomprehensible scale of space is the measure of what a parent is willing to cross to keep a promise to a child. Number 2. Inception, 2010. Christopher Nolan's Inception is the science fiction film as puzzle, a work that asks its audience to track multiple levels of nested reality simultaneously, while delivering one of the most kinetically sustained action films of the decade, and which succeeds at both tasks with a confidence that makes the difficulty look negligible. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Dom Cobb, a thief who specializes in extracting information from within dreams, hired to perform the reverse operation, planting an idea in the subconscious of a corporate heir so deeply that he believes it is his own. The concept is used to construct a film operating at 4 simultaneous narrative levels, each with its own physics, its own timescale, and its own emotional stakes. Tom Hardy, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Elliot Page anchor the supporting ensemble with enough personality to prevent them from becoming functions of the plot mechanism. The zero-gravity corridor sequence, filmed with practical wire rigs over many weeks, remains among the most inventively staged passages of the century. The ending, the spinning top, the cut to black, generated more sustained public debate about a film's conclusion than any other release of its era. That debate is still ongoing, and Nolan has never resolved it. He built a mechanism that runs on the question. The question has not worn out. Number 1. 2001. A Space Odyssey, 1968. Stanley Kubrick's 2001 sits at the top of this list, not because its rating is the highest, it is not, but because no other science fiction film has asked as much of its audience, delivered so fully on those ambitions, or altered what the genre was understood to be capable of. The film has almost no conventional plot: a prehistoric encounter with a black monolith, a mission to Jupiter haunted by a malfunctioning computer, and a final sequence that abandons narrative logic in favor of a journey through time and consciousness that audiences have been interpreting for 58 years without reaching consensus. HAL 9000, voiced by Douglas Rain with a calm so total it registers as menace, is the science fiction film's most psychologically unsettling artificial intelligence. Not because it is malevolent, but because its decision-making is coherent, and its coherence is the problem. Gary Lockwood and Keir Dullea perform against an environment so technically realized that the space sequences preceded NASA's own lunar footage. Douglas Trumbull achieved the special effects without digital tools of any kind, a constraint that produced images of a strange, handmade beauty that no subsequent production has matched in texture. Kubrick made 2001 as a deliberate act of formal ambition. A science fiction film that refused to explain itself, trusted its audience to sit with uncertainty, and concluded that the genre's highest aspiration was not to answer questions, but to make the questions feel vast enough to matter. 20 films, one genre that has never stopped expanding what cinema is permitted to imagine. 2001. A Space Odyssey sits at the top not because of its rating, but because of what it proved: that science fiction could be the form's most serious and most ambitious expression. Whether you came for the spectacle, the philosophy, or the fear, these films share one quality: they changed what you thought was possible. Tell us which one changed you most, and where you would have placed Kubrick on your list.